Don't. Okay, so welcome to another book talk organized by the International Society for the Critical Study of Divination. My name is Michael Lackner, and I have the honor to work as the president of the society. You will find our website under Critical Divination .org, one word. The society was established in 2016 in the framework of the International Consortium for Research in the Humanities with the title Fate, Freedom and Prognostication, Strategies of Coping with the Future in East Asia and Europe. The website is back now, but it's frozen, so to speak. So it's not active any longer, but you can, of course, visit it. Now, since 2023, the Society acts as a successor to this consortium, whose funding by the German Ministry of Education and Research lasted 14 years, from 2009 to 2023. During this period, we edited a book series with Brill Leiden, with 11 volumes by now, and more volumes are in preparation. In addition, we also edit a journal entitled International Journal of Divination and Prognostication, which is also with Brill. And together with a book series, Prognostication in History, the consortium, and now the Society for the Critical Study of Divination have established the research of pre-modern forms of prediction, forecasting, prognosis, briefly strategies of coping with the future as a solid, consolidated field within the humanities. And following an idea of our colleague, Dr. Li Gang, we started to stage a series of talks on the books that have been published so far in the framework of our series, but our talks are also meant to introduce all books relevant to the topic of the society, which is divination and prognostication. So I have the pleasure to introduce today's guests. First, the author of the book that is going to be discussed, Vincent Goossaert, who is a professor at the École Pratique des Hautes Études of Paris and has been a research fellow before. He has published books on Chinese temples, Heavenly Masters, 2000 Years of the Taoist State. His work focuses on Taoism with a very successful mixture of anthropology and historical studies, in-depth studies, I may say. Vie des saints exorcistes, hagiographie taoïste, Paris Les Belles Lettres, 2021, and Bureaucratie et Salut, Becoming a God in China, 2017. And Ilana, and he is also the co-editor of Tungbao. This is something I shouldn't forget to mention. Tungbao is, for those who don't know, the oldest sort of scientific journal of sinology in the West. And Elena Valussi is a senior lecturer at Loyola University. She'll be the discussant of this book. She has published extensively on the intersection between religion, gender, and the body in China, is vice president of the Society for the Study of Chinese Religions, and is also co-editor of a book within our series, which is Communicating with the Gods, together with Matthias Schumann. This is, again, a book on spirit writing in Chinese history. And so she's the ideal discussant of today's presentation of Vincent Goossaert. So welcome. I should check our YouTube channel. We had some book talks already, and the next one will be on January 15th next year with Tristan Brown. So I stop sharing and give the floor to Vincent. Yeah, here we are.
Okay, so let me share my own screen. Here it comes. Full screen. Yes. So warmest thanks, Michael and Li Gang, for this invitation, and to Elena for agreeing to join the discussion and discuss. This is an extremely nice occasion. I see on screen lots of old friends with whom we've been talking about Chinese ritual practices to talk with the gods and to know something about the future, including spirit writing. Some new friends as well. So I'm really glad and honored of this invitation. I'll try to be short. I'll not present all the chapters and that are in the book, but I'll try to give a brief outline of what I was trying to do with this book, and maybe say a few words about the work I have been doing since the book came out, but continuing to read and use and think about the material that went into the book, that is mostly the very rich and ever expanding corpus of divine revelation in Chinese language. Okay, so the departure point for this project is very simple. It's really trying to think for myself and maybe contribute to the expanding field of Chinese religious history and Chinese revelation, some sort of tool to bring order or to make sense of the sheer variety and amount of divine revelation that are widely available now that so much of this religious literature has been reprinted as part of reprint collections and other collections of historical material that are readily found in our research libraries. Quite a lot of it is available online as well. So there are lots of documents and beyond the canons that have already been studied for quite a while. I mean, Buddhist and Taoist canons, but beyond those canons, there is a very large amount of divine revelation that keep appearing. I mean, earlier texts that are made available and new revelation that are constantly produced and disseminated by all kinds of religious groups, right? So in order to try to have some sort of grasp on this ocean made of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different revealed texts, I do think that some sort of typology would be useful. And of course, the typology is not a tool, it's not the last word, it's just a few words about trying to make sense of this variety. But I still think it's useful as we move forward exploring this ocean of texts. And so within the world of Chinese divine revelation, or of Chinese religious literature, the particular type of revelation, that is texts that present themselves as having been written or spoken by divine beings, gods, to humans for the enlightenment or progress, for helping humans. This particular kind of text has not been there all along. The earlier religious texts that we have from China were, of course, depending on how you define the revelation, but by my own working definitions, they were not quite revelations. So the very concept of revelation seems to me to appear around the Han Dynasty and probably the later part of the Han, the first 2 centuries of our common era. And the appearance of revelation seems to me very intimately related to another new concept in Chinese thought at that time, which is eschatology, the idea that the world as we know it will come to an end, and that revelation, gods provide revelation for the very purpose of alerting humans to the upcoming apocalypse, because the eschatology in Chinese context tends to be, it's not necessarily, but it's most of the time of an apocalyptic kind. That is, the end of the world will end in a dramatic manner with most humans dying through various kinds of disasters, flooding, wars, epidemics, and so on and so forth. And revelations are urgent messages that are related to this upcoming end of the world. So this twin aspects of religious thought appear during the Han and have been at the center of a Chinese religious text production for over 2 millennia, right? And so my book is sort of a very preliminary attempt to make sense of that history. And so that's my working definition of a revelation. But then within that very broad, capacious category, there are various kinds of different modes of producing revelations. And I see the history of revelation as one of a continuous expansions of the various modes. New ritual techniques for producing revelation appear at various stage in history, but the old modes remain present and actually active. The earliest modes of revelation that seem to have been behind the earliest revelation we have from the Han Dynasty are still practiced today, right? But new modes of accessing divine discourse have become available through time. So one possible way to make sense of this history is to talk about an ecology where various modes coexist and interact in all kinds of ways. And this complex ecology keeps expanding and developing with new modes appearing without taking over the pre-existing modes of entering into discussion with the gods. And another element that I hoped to accomplish when I started embarking on this project was to, of course, work on the Chinese material, but also to think through this Chinese material in a way that could be conducive to comparison with other religious traditions and cultures, which also know a revelation, which have produced and used divine revelations produced in various ways as well. And comparing those modes of producing revelation between culture might be helpful to develop the larger project of comparative religious studies. Okay, just a few words about the sources, and I think those of you who have heard me make presentation before were expecting me to spend a couple of minutes talking about the CRTA, Chinese Religious Text Authority database, because this is something that is very dear to my heart and something I've been spending a lot of time working on over the last 4 or 5 years. This is a completely open access database of Chinese religious text where we describe one page is one edition. So we describe editions of Chinese religious text of all periods and all religious traditions, right? And so that includes lots of revelation. So this is also a tool that help us get a sense of the sheer amounts and variety of revealed literature in Chinese language. And so by now we have almost 5,000 different religious editions of religious texts described in CRTA, but this is just the first step, but it's expanding by the day. And within it, we have a tag that allow you to look at spirit written text. So that's the screenshot you see on the right hand side of the screen, and so you can access that. So it's a Wikimedia based database, so, and completely open access, so you can download the whole data within CRTA with one click and then play with it. Just credit us when you do that. And so this is also a tool that can allow you to build very quickly and easily a corpus of a spirit written text, right? So this basically the sources I've been using for this project are described within this database. Okay, now the key question, now that we've shortly introduced the questions and the sources, the the first recent research question is what happens when a God is made present and address humans. And this is a very concrete question because in our sources we have lots of descriptions such as this, right? So I just picked one example here on screen, and that's from the introduction to the book. But I could have chosen, I mean, literally thousands of other more or less similar examples, right? So this is from the introduction of revealed a geography of a major god. The god is Xu. So the book is called, yeah, Bashibu Hualu. It's the record of the 85 manifestations or transformation of this god among humans. And so the introduction says basically in the year 1224, our patriarch, the transcendent Lord Xu, descended Jiang at Jinling, which is today's Nanjing, major city in East Central China, and showed, well, gave, right, showed or gave teachings about loyalty and filial piety, and transformed and moved, converted lots of humans who then started to live according to the true Tao. Okay, so here we have in short form an account of a revelation when a God appears and gives teaching. So discursive contents, not just epiphany, just doing some sort of miracle, but actually conveying discursive teachings. What happens? The sentence here does not know, and the rest of that particular preface does not say more about it. Just tell us that he came and I taught humans. It does not tell how, and lots of possibilities come to mind to make sense of such a description, right? He could have actually spoken in dreams to some people. It could have made a written text appear miraculously at some place. It could have possessed a spirit medium and talk through his mouth or her mouth. Um, or it could have still been other ways. Could have been speaking to some sort of virtuoso through visualization techniques, and so on and so forth. We know from other texts, not from that text, but from other texts, would also refer to that particular event in year 1224, that it was actually spread writing. So we know, but the text does not know. And so that was my departing point. How do we make sense of those descriptions using very simple terms such as jiang, to descend, or to actually make descent, because jiang can also mean the action of a religious specialist or priest causing a god to jiang, to come down on earth and be among us humans and talk to us or write to us. So what I try to do with that kind of accounts is to neither have an excessively positivist approach saying, okay, these are just humans pretending that, putting words in the mouth or under the brush of a god, faking an event of revelation. And I'm not personally into too much into phenomenology either. I'm not trying to understand that in terms of an internal religious experience. I think this kind of course, it's possible to pursue that kind of inquiry lines into accounts of revelation, but I think the Chinese source material allow us to look at those as the outcomes of using ritual techniques to create divine presence, right? And the reason why we can do that is that the sources around divine revelation in the Chinese context are basically threefold. So we have accounts of the events, such as this short sentence I just introduced to you, found in paratext to Revelations or to geographical accounts, but we also have accounts in all kinds of notes or accounts or narratives, right, about events. We have the contents of the revelation themselves, right? We have the scriptures and other divine discourses. But third, but last but not least, we also have liturgical prescriptions. And I think that's possibly a contribution of my book, because in the current historiography, scholars tend to pay more attention to accounts of the events or to the revelation themselves, and less to the ritual text that, of course, are separate texts. These are, found elsewhere in the vast repositories of Chinese religious literature, but they are available. We do have a large amount of liturgical text, that is, manuals that explain how to perform rituals. So for many of those ritual events that resulted in the revealed text that we now have, we also have the manuals that the people use to create these events of divine presence and divine discourse. Not necessarily exactly the same manual, but something very closely related. I mean, we have enough to get a good sense, and not only for the modern contemporary period, but also for earlier periods. We have a good sense of the precise ritual technique that were used to create those revelation. And when we look at these three types of text together, then we get a good sense of the variety and how the ritual technique used to produce the revelation has some bearing on the form and contents of the revelation itself. Right? So revelation produced through visualization, or through dream making, or through spirit writing, or through spirit possession, are not usually not entirely similar in terms of format and content. Right? So based on all of this, I develop this typology, which is basically the core element of the first chapter in the book, where I try to look at all the various types that we have, and various accounts, and I gather them into 5 main ideal types. And of course, as all typology dealing with ideal types, this is not a description of reality. It was just a tool to think through the complexity of reality. But still, I think this is useful to think about different sorts of revelation. So my 5 types, I'm not going to read and comment this at length, but the first type, which I call sutra, but actually it's more precise than that. It's a very specific form of Mahayana Sutra, which was introduced to China by Buddhists, but also enthusiastically adopted by Taoists as well, and other local religious traditions, right? And so those types of Mahayana Sutra and their derivative forms are revelation that take place in heaven, so in an entirely different place and in a different time, right? So this is not related to human history. So we learn about how the Buddha talked to the bodhisattvas or the gods, or and that happened in an entirely different space and time. And we don't get to know how this text actually reached us humans in historical time. So we don't have the circumstances, there are no witnesses, and there is no codification about how to produce this. And I was a moment ago talking about how in China we have a very rich body of evidence about the liturgical techniques used to make the gods speak. And that's also something that's not necessarily unique, but that sets China apart from other traditions which also have revelation. And that includes Indian and Central Asian Buddhism that produced all of those Mahayana sutras in the first place, but where we have the sutras, but we don't have texts that describe how to to produce these Mahayana sutras. Whereas in the Chinese context, we do have texts that basically are DIY, do it yourself, revelation, instruction manuals. Second type is encounter. So for instance, ascetics or virtuosi go to the mountains. They refine themselves. They engage in advanced self-cultivation, and they get to meet immortals or gods who think them worthy of being instructed. So they receive instructions. So we have circumstances described, but now no witnesses, and there is no codified ritual method to produce that. Spirit possession, probably the oldest and most frequent form of producing divine discourse. We have circumstances described when you have historical records about a god possessing a medium to reveal something, for instance, about future events or that kind of things. Usually you would have a place, a date, names of people who were present, and they are witnesses. Spirit possession, as a rule, not necessarily, but as a rule, as is a group experience. But there is no really codification. Of course, there are ritual codification for inducing spirit possession, but it's also often described as as a spontaneous event on the initiative of the god possessing the medium, not the medium causing the god to come. Visualization is an encounter between humans and God in a mental space. So by definition, there are no witnesses. So we can have, and for instance, the famous Shangxing revelation of the 4th century of the Common Era are a produce of such visualization practices. So advanced adepts create a mental space when they can meet the gods or the Genjen, the transcendents or immortals, talk with them, get instructed, and then write this down, right? So, and this is codified. We have manuals for engaging in visualization, how to create the mental presence of those gods, right? But there are no witnesses because this happens only in your own private mental space. No one else is privy to these events. And finally, the last type is what I call presence type, jiangshen, God descending, or to make gods descend, right? So in the causative use of that verb, jiang. And that's the only type when you have, that ticks all 3 boxes, right? So these circumstances are described. In the presence event, you know where, when, who. They were witnesses. It's a group experience. And for instance, spirit writing, which is one subtype of presence, divine presence making, spirit written text usually, again, not necessarily 100% of time, but usually, typically, would tell you this happened that day, that month, that year, and that place is that group in the presence of so and so and so, right? And it's codified. We do have liturgical manuals explaining how to produce spirit writing or control spirit possession or dream making and other types of presence type divine revelation. And these are actually, some of them, of course, were secret, secret in terms of transmitted from master to disciple, Nebu, knowledge only transmitted to initiated person, but not all the time. I mean, in everyday encyclopedia, the so-called Zheyong Lei Shu of the Ming and Qing period, you add alongside all kinds of practical knowledge, I mean, divinatory, medical, administrative, and so on and so forth. You have instruction on how to practice spirit writing and that kind of divine presence, whereby you can ask the gods about, your future destiny and other things. Right, so having sort of established that kind of broad typology, that account, I hope, for all the different types of divine revelation that were produced all the way from the earliest instances under the Han, during the Han periods, down to the present day. Then the book focuses on the 5th type, right, the presence type, that I argue not all of my colleagues are still fully convinced by that, and maybe Elena will address this question in a moment, but which I think are very closely related to a whole family of new Taoist ritual techniques that appears around 10th to 14th century, 10th dynasties in Song Yuan period China, which involved the key role of an initiated priest called Fa Shi, we use formalized techniques, and we have a huge amount of the liturgical manuals produced by and for this fashion, describing, and the core element of that is how to produce this divine presence for all kind of things, divination, healing, exorcism, rainmaking, and so on and so forth. And these are, as a rule, group events where witnesses are participants and vouch for the authenticity of the divine presence created by the priest, right? And so the general term for those events of divine presence ritually created by those fashi are, again, using the same word, jiang, right? To make, and here is really make or cause the gods to descend, to be present, right? Jiangshen or Jiangling. So that's the very general term, and that's exactly the term that was used in the short narrative of the Xuxun revelation that I discussed a moment ago. And then within that category, you have subcategories that are more precise descriptions of how exactly the priest causes the gods to appear. So he can appear in physical form, let humans know what they look like. That's Jiangxian. And that's actually quite common. And one of the purposes of producing Jiangxian is to allow painters and sculptors to know exactly what the gods look like and to create Zhenxing, I mean, trustworthy, authentic statues or paintings of the gods. So Zhongyan is to make them talk, Zhongbi is to make them write, and Zhongmeng is to make them appear in dreams. And this is also a ritual technique, just like spirit writing, Zhongbi, or spirit possession through the body of a medium in Zhongyan. Okay. And through this, we can, I mean, the priest can, and usually often with the use of someone whose body is used for, I mean, lent to the god, often called tongzi, boy, but they are not necessarily young men. So they lend their hand or mouth to the gods so that the god can, to spirits, when we priest summon spirits called Kao Zhao, or invite or summon gods to come and talk to them. And going one step further, discussing the relationship of spirit writing and together with other means of producing divine presence, such like, Zhong Xian, Zhong Yan, Zhong Bi, right? And their close connection with the new Taoist ritual traditions that appear in the early modern period, Song Yuan, basically. I see this connection as the priests developing these techniques in order to get formal responses from the god, which they need in the context of conducting a ritual, right? So much Taoist ritual is really about processing paperwork, and sometimes so priests send written documents to the gods all the time, and sometimes so if the document is just to inform them, that's it. But some documents require a response, just like when you write a letter to the administration, and you send a form, and you need the form sent back to you with a stamp or a signature or something. It's exactly the same thing with the gods, right? And this is called chubaoing, asking for a response from the god. And there are many other terms, pida, pijiang, pibao, pishe, deng, deng, deng. And these are all from the spirit writing, and we have descriptions from them, and from the liturgical description of how this is done. This is very clearly just forms, various technical forms of spirit writing. And we also have within liturgical manuals, and here you have a small quote from Fahai Ju, which is a late Mongolian period collections of those Daofa liturgical manuals. And you say, when you practice this particular ritual, there are three ways you can get the response from the god. One is Pibao, which is getting the god to write or approve in written form on the document itself, or you can get the response in a dream, or you can get the response on the Huitan, the ash table. So what is the ash table? The ash table is a table covered with ash where the gods write a response. And the very early form, and you have the manuals, the screenshot here is just one page from the modern 1000 edition of that particular manual where the gods actually write various kinds of drawings, forms, which are the god's response to the request. But I think this is clearly one antecedent to spread writing, because spread writing is also about writing on ash or on sand on a table, sometimes actually called huitan, right? Ash or ash table. But of course, this early form is not really writing; it's just signs that are then interpreted, deciphered. But then the gods started actually writing legible characters and actually full text, and sometimes books running to thousands of pages. But we really have this clearly this continuous development from in the course of a ritual, getting the response of the god in those kind of forms, and all the way to getting the gods to deliver long text and teachings. All right, and that's how it gets to spread writing. So I probably don't need to introduce spread writing in too much detail here. Probably everyone in this virtual room has seen it. So this is a picture I took many years ago in a small spread writing shrine in an apartment in Hong Kong. And here the medium we're standing is writing on, and it's a sand table, but it's basically it could have been ash. It's the same technique. And here it's a technique where the medium writes. There is a one single medium holding the writing implement with two hands, but there are also techniques where we have two mediums. There are techniques where there are no mediums, where the writing implements move by itself. So there spread writing is a extremely rich and diverse family of ritual techniques, but they have this in common, that it's ritually codified. And so it all appears around the 11th century. It's always linked to personal bond with what I call salvational gods, gods who care for the salvation of humanity as a whole, but also cares personally for disciples that they accept on a personal basis. There's a very strong personal bond. Eschatological inspiration. I was mentioning earlier that eschatology and revelation are two sides of the same coin, and this is particularly obvious in the case of spread writing. The early spread writing text, long text from the Song period, make it clear that spread writing is the means chosen by the god that are most time effective in times of eschatological urgency, when they need to address as many humans as possible as they are facing imminent apocalypse. And it's also a means that give a voice to thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of different gods and spirits. Time is running short, and we really want to leave time for Elena to discuss, so maybe I can use just a couple of minutes more running through these last slides. So this is a list of the different types of contents produced by spread writing, but I probably don't need to discuss each of those textual genres in detail, but we see the gradual developments. The first texts were mostly commentaries and scriptures and ritual instructions, and then as writing developed, and especially around the late 16th century, sort of accelerated and became, probably through the introduction of simpler ritual techniques, become even more widely practiced. And the amount of text, and especially morality books produced through spread writing, sort of exploded, rocketed around that time. And by the Qing dynasty and 20th century, spread writing had become the means through which the largest numbers of revelations were produced, even though other means of producing revelations still existed. Just a couple of very quick words about what I'm doing now. So this last two slides are not in the book. This is the sort of a continuation of my work on spirit writing since the book came out. So one thing I'm really looking at now is the transaction between humans and gods through spirit writing beyond and above the textual discursive contents, right? So knowledge is spirit writing is about conveying knowledge from the gods to the humans, answering questions, some of them really of divinatory nature, some of them more about doctrine and cosmology, also some very practical personal advice that is provided by the gods, but lots of other things happen as well. Blessing, curing. I mean, spirit writing groups were basically places where people went for cures. And they were first, or very often first cured by the god, and then became disciple, and then became involved in all the other activities of the spirit writing group. So, but healing is a major element of it. Initiation, even status, people joining spirit writing groups become gods when they die, and they talk when after they die, they talk back to their former colleagues and friends through spirit writing to continue the discussion. So there, it's about divination and the promotion of the gods to higher ranks as well. And also lots of affects. And that's probably something that has been less researched so far, but spirit writing also allows gods and humans to exchange affect. They talk about reciprocal love and care and very deep feelings. And through these exchange of feelings, both humans and gods are allowed to subjectify themselves. They become subject, and by subject I mean um, talking in the first person, saying I, and talking about oneself. So I feel that this is my history, this is my values, these are my feelings. And humans do that when addressing the gods, and the gods do that. And I think this whole subjectification thing allows us to understand why the dialogue, the interaction with the gods for members of spirit writing groups is an end in itself. It's not only about getting knowledge and getting answers to their questions, but also that relationship is something that is sought in and for itself. Okay. And so this allows us to look at gods and humans forming a society through spirit writing, and therefore their relation, I think, can fruitfully be explored through a relational approach, such as using social network analysis. So this is just an image from an article I published a couple of years ago, looking at the connection between gods and humans and gods through a corpus of 13 different spirit writing groups. But I won't discuss that particular project now, so to leave time for Elena. But it's just to give a sense of all the things we can do with spirit written literature, and how spirit writing is a ritual tool that enables a lot of things to happen, both textual production, but also affect production and relationships. Okay, stop share.
Thank you very much. That was for this really panoramic view of Revelation. I remember that years ago, Grégoire SPC wrote something about the terminology of Revelation, 15 terms or so, and you cite him also in your book. And the interesting thing for me was that there are descriptions or definitions from top to bottom and others from bottom to top. So to receive something is, of course, from bottom to top. And Zhang, in fact, unites both meanings. It has a transitive meaning to make someone appear, or to make someone manifest himself, or even just to descend, which is the intransitive meaning. It's interesting that you have both aspects, the bottom top, the top bottom aspect in these descriptions, various descriptions and various terms for revelation. But now the time has come for Elena. Thanks for this talk for the moment. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michel, and thank you, Vincent, for this great introduction to your book. And of course, I'm very familiar with Vincent's book because it's a really important contribution to the field. And I wanted to say a couple of things about the field before. And so the coming together not of the field of the study of spirit writing, which I think is important to understand the value of Vincent's book within it, because the question of spirit writing and the techniques, the technique of spirit writing has been around for several decades, but hasn't really been taken seriously or centrally in the study of religious scriptures, Taoist scriptures, but religious scriptures in general. So it's only been, I would say, a decade, especially with the work that has been done with the Dao Zhanji Yao by the late Monica Esposito and later, that we have really started to realize how important this technique is for the production of religious scriptures. And so, however, up until just a few years ago, we had some piecemeal studies of certain altars. Of course, we had plenty of studies for Taiwan and increasingly on Hong Kong, but mostly on localized practices or localized traditions or anthropological works and some historical works. But we were a little bit in the so we didn't have a very clear idea of the importance of this technique in the production of religious knowledge, and I think that with Vincent's book, we have made a very great step forward in terms of, as he was talking about, in terms of understanding and categorizing the variety of texts, the variety of techniques of revelation, and the variety of gods involved in this transmission. And increasingly, we are also understanding a lot more about the relationship, as Vincent was just talking about, the relationship between the gods and the humans that that summon them. And so I think really Vincent's book is a milestone in really defining the field, but also providing a background, a historical background on revelation in general, and more specifically then sort of making it much more understandable why in the Ming and Qing dynasties we have such an increase in production of religious texts through spirit writing. So providing not only descriptions of what's happening today or what was happening in the Qing dynasty, but also what the background of that production is. How did we get to this point? And so I think that's really important. It's a really important step forward. And so we can then, as Vincent was saying, last week we were together at a conference in Tokyo on spirit writing, and one of his last remarks was, let's what we have been doing so far is the beginning, and so now let's the next steps are to really understand even in much more detail what the variety of experiences have been. So now that we have this this volume that allows us to really put spirit writing in historical context, now we can much more easily sort of understand the variety of the increasing variety of texts that are available to us, because we do have more and more texts that are appearing either in collections that we maybe weren't aware of in the past that held spirit writing texts, but also there's a lot of research on the ground in terms of looking at local libraries and looking at other kinds of textual materials that we are realizing it was all produced by spirit writing. So we have now a much better way of approaching these texts than before. And so there haven't been very many books of this kind. In fact, there haven't really been books of this kind sort of summarizing the importance of spirit writing, and so this is a great contribution. I would say that also it's important. Let's see. In another important intervention is this idea that which is new and as Vincent said, a little bit controversial for some scholars, is that Vincent is asserting that spirit writing has its origin squarely within the Taoist tradition and the Taoist ritual tradition, because until Vincent made this sort of assertion, many scholars in the field were thinking that this is much more of a lay practice, a practice outside of the Taoist context, with ties to the Taoist context, of course, and with contents that is Taoist for sure, but produced outside of the Taoist clerical context, whereas Vincent is really focusing on the fact that this technique, whether or not later on, especially in the Ming and Qing, has been appropriated by lay communities, has, however, its origins within the Taoist clerical context. And as Vincent said, some scholars in our field are still not convinced about that, and maybe Vincent can comment on that and how he sees this transition possibly from this technique being born or being developed by within the Taoist clerical context to kind of seeping out of that context and really being appropriated for a variety of reasons by lay groups, because we do know, of course, that especially in the Qing dynasty, the majority of groups that are producing the largest amount of spirit writing texts are outside of the Taoist traditions within Taoist temple traditions. They are lay communities. However, as Vincent also mentioned in his book, the question of who is lay and who is Taoist is also a very fraught question. And so again, maybe Vincent can talk a little bit about this and say, who is a Taoist, who is a ritual master, who has the authority of summoning the gods, and who what's the difference? Is there a difference, and what is the difference between lay communities and non-lay communities in terms of communicating with gods and receiving texts from gods? And the last thing, I have many things to say about this, but I want to leave some time for a couple of questions as well from the audience. But I do really appreciate the next steps that Vincent is taking in terms of talking about affects and talking about close relationships between gods and humans, and I think this is a really valuable direction. I myself have talked a little bit about this in terms of relationship between goddesses and women within communities, and I think that it's really valuable to look at the personal relationships between gods and humans, and so I really look forward to hearing more about that. And in terms of the larger, and I also want to hear a little bit if Vincent can talk a little bit about the future of the field. I can see that there's a lot more more specific historicizing and also research about more local traditions. At this conference in Tokyo, we had, for example, about 4 different talks about Sichuanese traditions of spirit writing and how they intersect with each other, which I find very, very interesting and valuable to really look at the localization of tradition. Is there a specific spirit written culture of Sichuan, or is there a spirit written culture of Guangdong, which has been looked at by a variety of scholars as well? So is that in the future of the field of spirit writing? So I'm going to stop here because there's only 5 minutes. And so I'm going to let maybe Vincent respond, or maybe let some other people ask some questions. Thank you
so much, Elena. Thank you so much for these comments. I mean, I'm afraid due to time limitation, we give Vincent the opportunity to respond for, yes, the next 5 or 6 minutes. And then all people from the audience are kindly invited to write their comments or questions into the chat. And both of you will be sort of asked to respond if possible. Okay, Vincent.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to be short, even though it's not necessarily something I easily do. But I'd really be happy to have more comments from the audience. And I'm extremely grateful to Elena. And as Elena very nicely said, this is really a collective endeavor. I mean, taking seriously the spirit writing as a practice and reading the text seriously for I mean, there are lots of prejudice about spirit reading text, supposed to be always the same thing, repetitive and conservative and and whatnot. It's not. It's really a fascinating literature. And we are a very nice group, and so we met in Tokyo last week, and there was this wonderful conference in Erlangen, and Elena and Matthias with us today did this absolutely wonderful edited volume out of it. So we are a group, so we meet in person every so often in Erlangen or elsewhere. We read each other. We are and to really, it's our dialogue that I've really produced, and the Daozhong Jiao project was crucial to that. Elena said that it was really a life-changing moment to me when Monica, the late Monica Esposito, invited me to read some of those spirit written texts in Daozhong Jiao, and it really opened an entirely new world to me. So this is really, we're talking today about one book, but this book is just one part, one individual contribution to a whole collective experience, which is extremely nice because all of wonderful, creative young scholars are also part of that group, and it's also a great human experience. So yeah, maybe I pushed a little bit hard trying to argue that spirit writing is really one part of the new Taoist ritual traditions of the early modern period. But when you have to make a new point, maybe sometimes you have to make it a little bit forcefully in order to make an impression and push back against the received narrative, which is that spirit writing is really a lay thing, directly communicating with the God. We don't need a priest. But I think actually it's a ritual technique, so you need an initiation for ritual techniques, right? So I think this whole lay thing, and that's also the idea that it's a very playful thing. You exchange poem with imaginary young female friends, and you banter with them and exchange poems. That happened. That's for sure, that happened. But I don't think that's the mainstream of what spirit writing is all about. That's a side product. That's not the main story. I think the main story is quite serious. It's really about conducting large scale rituals, usually in a Taoist format, in order to get things from the gods. And that's not playful. And most of the stories, when you try to collect all of the stories, both early modern, contemporary, about spirit writing, they are not about joking or playing, right, with the gods. They are not. Yeah, so I think some scholars may have an excessively narrow definition of what a Taoist is. Of course, there are professional Taoists. There are monks and nuns they live in monasteries. Okay, that's one way of being a Taoist. Most Taoists were initiated and therefore empowered, enabled to conduct those rituals, exchange, getting things from the gods. It's not their jobs, right? Many of the practitioners, and there is a wonderful article by the late Judith Bolts about this for the Songyuan period. Many of those people who were practicing those Dao Fa ritual, Jiangshen, which I discussed earlier, they were officials or merchants, right? So would you call them Taoist? Well, they were not exclusively Taoist, right? The public identity was, being an official or a merchant or, a landowner or whatnot, or a Neo-Confucian philosopher, if you like, or school teacher, right? But they were also Taoist because they were initiated and trained to perform those advanced Taoist ritual, right? So so the whole argument of is it Taoist or not? I mean, I think basically the liturgy is uses a Taoist framework, but that does not mean that you cannot learn to do that, even though you are not a professional Taoist. Future of the field, the local traditions, yes, absolutely. And even within a given area, the tradition is multifaceted. So I was in Taiwan 2 weeks ago, and I could witness some spread writing there, and the variety of spread writing practices within Taiwan and even within Greater Taipei is astounding. There is not one Taiwanese local traditional spread writing. There are tens or of dozens of Taiwanese spread writing traditions, and they are very strikingly different, right? So I think we are, as Elena very nicely said, we are just beginning to grasp this variety. And probably there are a lot of things that we know from historical sources that we have not witnessed yet, but which are still somewhere a living tradition. In Tokyo, we are talking about the what I was briefly alluding to, the spread writing without a medium, right? It's sometimes called hanging brush. So you have the writing implement suspended from a rafter, and the brush moves by itself. So we know texts that were produced like this. Is it still a living tradition? Are still people doing it somewhere in the larger Chinese world? Maybe. As a general methodology, I start from the premise that everything exists, right? So we still know so very little about what is going on in China or the Chinese world in general. So maybe, I mean, if we look for that, we might find it. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Many thanks to Vincent and to Elena and to the audience, of course. And we might even be able to continue this discussion during the presence of a spirit writing group in Erlangen in next summer. And that would be nice because that would allow us to approach one of these practices, of course, as you say, rightly say, Vincent. I mean, there's one of them. It's just one of them. But it would allow us, to approach them from our historiographical knowledge from one side and from the practice, which will be sort of enacted at that moment. So thank you all very much. And well, next book talk on January 15th. Thank